The Dolphins and Chargers dominated in week 3. Who is next up in week 4? The Football Guys DFS show has all your cash and GPP plays for the week's main slate. And I'm joined here tonight with our good friend Devin Knotts and, of course, Phil Alexander. And so I'm going to start off with the games of the week. And Devin, you want to give me the games that you're looking at for this slot and maybe drop how you did last week as well.
Yeah, I'm not getting a haircut until I have a losing week on cracking FanDuel, which is where I give my cash lineup. So to Football Guys subscribers, so go subscribe and give this video a like. We haven't asked for it one time this year. Not once. We don't ask for it like 20 times a show. One time, give us a like. That's all we can ask for. I think games that people are looking at this week, Buffalo Miami is probably the one that everyone is targeting. Sneakily, we can talk about that game. Like, is it going to be a shootout? Should you fade it? I go back and forth. I think Minnesota, Carolina, again, we were all over Andy Dalton last week. I think that game could potentially shoot out. And then it's like a plug and play every week, but whoever's facing Tennessee in the passing game, and this is certainly a potential get-right game for Cincinnati. We don't really know the health of Joe Burrow. He looked okay. Statistically, he was fine last week, but efficiency-wise, he wasn't. So we'll get into it, but there's not that one game this week that you have to stack or you're going to lose. Thank God.
Yeah, and we saw the Jamar Chase explosion on Monday night that we were waiting for, and so it looks like the Bengals are heading in the right direction. Phil, do you have any other games that you're looking at or trying to grab action on?
Yeah, in addition to those, I don't mind the Rams at the Colts. I like a lot of pieces in those games. Vegas at the Chargers looks like it could have some scoring, at least on one side. And I'm going to give you my one play every week that nobody's looking at the game, but it's my bet to go over the total and be a significant game for GPPs. And this week for me, that's Pittsburgh at Houston, and it's 41 point total. I think it gets past there pretty easily.
Yeah, and the Toy Story game on Sunday morning, my kids are excited about it.
I can't wait. I have my kids all on Sunday morning. My wife is going to be out of town, so I'll have all 3 girls. And so it's just perfect timing for me to have that Toy Story. And unfortunately, I'll be missing the live Q&A that you can check out that Football Guys does with Joey Wright and Jagger May at 10:30, followed up by Dave Kluge and Alfredo Brown, along with Adam Hutchison at 11:30. So make sure to check that out on Sunday morning, but also watch the Toy Story game. I can't wait for that. And of course, you guys are the best in the business. You cleared out my slate of what I was looking at. The other one that I kind of mentioned is maybe the 49ers going against the Cardinals. I think that the 49ers can definitely hang some points there. They have an implied total above 28 points. And if Brandon Ayuk is out of that game, I think you're going to see some focused targets between George Kittle, Deebo Samuel, and Christian McCaffrey. Now we're going to dive into our cash game plays. We'll start out with quarterbacks. Phil, you want to lead us off with your quarterbacks you're targeting for cash games?
Sure. So the first thing that I noticed when I opened up DraftKings and started looking at the slate was that we finally have some looser pricing this week, it feels like. And I think it's led by a handful of cheap quarterbacks that are cash game viable. You mentioned the 49ers and Brock Purdy. He's on my list at 5,900. I think he's okay for cash. Kenny Pickett is 5,100. Much riskier to plug him into a cash game lineup, but I wouldn't kick it out. And out of all of them, I'm looking at Russell Wilson at 5,800 if I could get there. Chicago has allowed, they allowed 317 passing yards to Baker Mayfield in week 2. That's pretty much all you need to know about them. So
one thing about Russell, and I'm just going to back up Phil's point for like once in a blue moon. He's back to his old self. Like if you look at his yards per completion, yards per attempt, yards per game, he's right in line with his career average, if not exceeding in most of those categories. So I do think that he's getting a lot of bad rap for being 0-3, but like a lot of it's not his fault.
Yeah, there was nothing that Russell Wilson could have done last week to prevent the onslaught that the Dolphins dropped on top of them. So Devin, where are you? Are you still rocking with Andy Dalton this week? Or are you waiting and see? Are you going up at the position?
I don't really know, right? I mean, is Bryce Young back? It sounds like he might be.
Sounds like he might be.
And if he is, I want no interest. Like I have zero interest in that. If Andy Dalton's back, I mean, his price is still good. Yeah, 5,100. I would be all over Andy Dalton at 5,100. It's just too good of a price. CJ Stroud is interesting, 5,600. It sounds like Phil's on the other side of that game. But the one that I'm really targeting for cash this week, Jameis Winston, 5,300. Going up against his former team in Tampa Bay. They get Alvin Kamara back, but Tampa Bay's run defense is really strong, and they're allowing the 5th most passing yards to opposing quarterbacks this year. Kirk Cousins threw for 344. Justin Fields threw for over 200 in this offense. So, like, if he's going to throw for over 200 when he can't throw for more than 50 and a half against Kansas City, that just tells you a little bit about where Tampa Bay is as a defense. So I think if it sounds like Jameis is going to go, like
I believe it is
out, right?
Yeah, Derek Carr's still mispracticed with that shoulder injury, so I do believe it's going to be Jameis. And I think Derek Carr had a comment today to the extent of, "Hey, Jameis Winston is a starting NFL quarterback. We're ready to go with him." So
yeah, I mean, I think that he's incredibly intriguing. And then if you have money, which I don't really want to pay up for quarterbacks this week, but I do think Anthony Richardson at 6,700 is probably the guy that I would go up to, but I probably wouldn't do that just because there's so many guys in that 5 to 6K range that you probably don't have to. On FanDuel, I think it's a different story. I think you want a guy who's going to run the ball, and Richardson at 7,600 or even Justin Fields at 7,200, just because you don't get this 300-yard bonus on FanDuel. The rushing attempts and rushing touchdowns mean so much more. And Josh Allen done basically if he doesn't this is sort of his last shot. They're going to turn very quickly on him if you don't have a good game against a team that just gave up 70. So I think that at 7,200 on FanDuel, he's probably a guy that I'm going to be looking heavily at.
And we did see him run a little bit more last week than what had been taking place before. And so I think that one of the keys for that Bears offense is get that rush game rolling the way that it was in the middle of part of last year. So I agree. I mean, this is now or never week on Fields. Is Josh Allen prohibitively expensive? He's dominated the Dolphins in the past, and it's like 27 touchdowns. I think the Patriots are maybe the next with 16 in his career. And that's going to be our game we're targeting on the in terms of the main slate. Is that price up for him just way too much to even come close to in cash this week?
I think it is. I think that the cash game roster construction, at least on DraftKings, is pretty obvious, right? You're going in the cheap range at QB, probably the mid range at running back, and you're spending up at wide receiver. I don't know, Devin, you got a different take there?
Yeah, could he get there? Could he throw for 4 touchdowns and 300 plus yards? Yeah, he could. But if he doesn't, you're in a lot of trouble. Even if he has 300 yards and 2 touchdowns, that's what? 15, 19, 23 points, 8,200. It's not bad, but you need to hit on your lower end guys. So if you're comfortable with some of your 4 to 5K receivers and Justin Jefferson, Tyreek Hill, Devontae Adams, or Jamar Chase don't break the slate, then, it can work. But it's too risky for me. I normally don't pay up on quarterbacks just because we see Kirk Cousins throw for 300 every week and his price never changes.
Yeah. Yeah, he's a nice one this week too. I agree. All right, let's dive into running backs. Devin, where are you going in cash on running backs?
Yeah, there's a lot of just mediocrity. A lot of just guys that are the same. I think the guy that pops, 2 guys, Javonte Williams at 5,500 against his Bears defense, just because it's the Bears and they have one of the worst run defenses in the NFL. They're allowing the 2nd most fantasy points to opposing running backs, averaging 2.3 touchdowns per game to the position. So definitely somewhere that I'm looking at. So that's the start. I think DeAndre Swift at 5,700 is interesting, just because he's taken over that running backfield, and it's such a good offensive line that I trust them even in somewhat of a difficult matchup against Washington. And then sort of the under the radar one, and it's probably not going to be that popular. I think Kyron Williams and James Cook and Zach Moss might be a little more popular, but I really like Alexander Madison at 5,800 against Carolina. So Carolina is allowing the third most fantasy points for opposing running backs. They're allowing 2.3 touchdowns per game, and they've been shredded by Kenneth Walker and the combination of Tyler Algier and Bijan Robinson. So they looked good against New Orleans, which is the only reason that they're not in the number one spot as far as worst run defenses. But they're without Shaq Thompson. They're starting just a bunch of guys at linebacker, and Madison is sort of under the, like, he's very much in the doghouse. If he fumbles, you're kind of screwed because he's fumbled 4 times in the last 2 games. So that is risky, and maybe you don't do it because if he fumbles early on, I think Cam Akers gets the role. But he did look better last week, and he sort of got thrown under the bus unfairly because they faced Philadelphia and Tampa Bay in the first 2 weeks, which are just brutal matchups. So I still believe in the guy. It's just a matter of, does the coaching staff?
Yeah, and I think you can almost make the argument that Kyron Williams and Alexander Madison are 2 similar plays because they both are dominating touches, but Kyron Williams had a softer open to the season than what Alexander Madison did, and that, those low point totals to open the year, everybody's off of them. Phil, do you have anybody else you're going for?
Yeah, I like Kyron Williams. I mean, I'm just looking at it in terms of dollars per projected touch for cash games, and I mean, the guy played 100% of the snaps last week, 100%, 97% the week before. He's got a 15% target share on the season. That's terrific for a running back. And even though the results weren't there last week, I don't think you could do better than that usage in cash. Although one guy we haven't talked about yet comes close, and that is Zach Moss, who is also 6,000. His role in the offense is not quite as good as Williams is in LA because he doesn't catch passes, but he's a close second. I just like that range. Devin mentioned a couple of other guys in that neighborhood. James Cook is a good one. But I just don't see spending up, right? Pollard and McCaffrey are the spend up options. You got Pollard against New England, and McCaffrey's just too expensive for the optimal roster construction. And there's a little bit of danger if the 49ers end up blowing out the Cardinals in terms of his workload, and they are 14-point favorites. So Vegas seems to think it's headed in that direction.
Devin, you're the Browns fan. What's your thoughts on Jerome Ford? Do you think that matchup's just going to be way too muddy to play Jerome Ford? Because it does seem like he has the lion's share of the workload there.
Does he?
I think they're working Kareem Hunt in. And last week, it was pretty intentional. Snap share was heavily towards Ford, but when Hunt came in, they gave him the ball. And so I think it's probably one of those things, get acclimated, get ready to go.
Yeah, I mean, my issue with Jerome Ford is and I'm going to take a shot here because I've been very critical of their reporting, but if Pro Football Talk never releases the featured back, according to Kevin Stefanski, first of all, no coach in the NFL says featured back. Like, that's a fantasy football terms. It's just not true. And if you watch the video, you can clearly say he doesn't say that. He doesn't even mention Jerome Ford's name. I'm going to calm down. That never comes out, like, Jerome Ford is okay. I think he's a guy, and he's propped up on the 69-yard touchdown, and I know all touchdowns count, but if you take that out, his stats aren't particularly great. 10 for 18 last week against Tennessee, facing a good Baltimore defense. I mean, they're not the Baltimore defense that historically has been great. I just don't know. I mean, if it was a favorable game script because they were just dominating the Titans last week. But what if they fall behind? Then it's a Kareem Hunt game. I firmly believe if they get behind 7-0, Kareem Hunt's in the game the majority of the time. That's my worry.
Where do you guys think Devon Achane is going to come in this week after that explosion last week? Because he's kind of in that same price range. A lot of guys that we talked about.
Devon 4chan?
Devon for Chan. I think I said it right.
Yeah, with his 4 touchdowns. I don't know. He's not really on my radar.
That was going to
I
be
have his
my
roster
answer.
percentage.
Yeah. All right.
Like
let's
2%.
move to wide receivers. Yeah, I figured Public's going to be on him pretty hard after what he put up, but I
He's
don't know
still the
that's
backup, right?
well. I don't know. Split
They're not going to
carries.
run for 8 touchdowns
I
again.
know. Well, I sure hope not against the Bills. One would hope not.
Yeah, I think if it was
Let's dive
like
into wide receivers. Still, where are you looking at wide receivers?
Yeah, I was just going to say if it was maybe like 3 or 4, maybe 5 years ago, I think you would have seen the crowd pile on HN. But the tools that are out there now and the crowd that's still playing DFS, in its current iteration, I think they're a little sharper than that. They know that that running game is going to come back down to earth against Buffalo. But wide receivers for cash, there's 3 guys that are pretty locked into my lineup right now. The first one's Keenan Allen. Um, I don't know what's his median target projection this week, like 15, with no Mike Williams. I mean, he's just going to get peppered, and the Raiders are a bottom 10 defense against just about everything. Puka Nakua, 6,700. I think we saw his floor last week at like 12 DraftKings points. There just isn't another receiver under 7K that has the same ceiling. And this is a Colts pass defense that got lit up by Calvin Ridley in week 1 and Nico Collins in week 2. And then I'm also spending on Devontae Adams, which doesn't really need much explanation. He's one of the greatest receivers to ever play the game. And he happens to have the best possible matchup this week against the Chargers, who have allowed over 50% more DraftKings points to wide receivers than league average, which is the most in the league.
Yeah, I think on DraftKings it's play 2 of the 3 of Keenan Allen, Devontae Adams, or Jamar Chase.
Yeah.
I mean, Jefferson and Hill at 16 or 1,600 more. I guess Hill is only 1,200 more. I'm worried about this Miami passing attack just because Tua has not had great success against Baltimore, especially on the road. Outside of his first game that he played against Baltimore, he hasn't thrown for more than 230 yards or something. So Diggs is okay. I just always view Diggs as a little more risky because he's a loose cannon. You just never know what you're going to get from him. But yeah, for me, it's Keenan Allen, Devontae Adams. If Garoppolo plays, I think that's a big if. They looked completely in sync this past week. I mean, he had 20 targets, something ridiculous. And then if you want to spend down, I think there's 2 options that you could go with. I think Adam Thielen facing his old team in Minnesota at 4,500. If Andy Dalton plays, he's the number 1 guy on my board. Tank Dell is also interesting at 4,600. I talked a little bit about CJ Stroud. Of the 2, I do prefer Thielen just a little bit more. I think that Bryce Young is going to watch that game and really realize, hey, I do have a number 1 receiver here in Carolina, and they're gonna scheme some easier passes for him. Dell looked good. I mean, last week they faced Jacksonville. He had 145 yards and a touchdown. He has 17 targets over the last 2 games, and it's a somewhat favorable matchup against Pittsburgh. They're allowing the 5th most fantasy points to opposing wide receivers. Minnesota's allowing 3rd. So there's some very clear bad secondaries, and we do a passing matchups, which are the top 5 and bottom 5 at Football Guys, free to everyone who signs up for our email. And both of those teams were featured this week. So.
Yeah, I love Thielen's price on DraftKings at 4,500. That was one that immediately stood out to me. I wanted to see where he was going to come in going up against the Vikings with that revenge game narrative and the big week that he had last week. So I was pretty surprised he was still down there. I got my eye a little bit on maybe Cortland Sutton at 5,300 on DraftKings. We talked about Russell Wilson in that Chicago game. He kind of looks like he might have the Michael Thomas role, and maybe we want to see it one more week before we really go there. But I think that could be a spot as well. I thought it was interesting on FanDuel. AJ Brown's price was 7,700 on FanDuel, and that seemed pretty low relative to the involvement that we saw on Monday night. And I realized the prices get set before Monday night. Is that somebody that's on your radar for cash?
No, but he might be. 77 is like it's a good price. Chase is 82, Adams is 81, so like he's right there. I think Adams would be my top guy over on FanDuel, and then one of Brown or Chase. Probably lean a little bit more towards Chase, but the guy on FanDuel I like a lot this week is Tutu Atwell at 6,300. I think that that's a really good price. This Colts, I mean, Phil mentioned it. This Colts secondary is just abysmal. I mean, they're just starting guys that they off the street. So I do think Atwell is sort of the underlooked, forgotten guy, where Puka is getting most of the love and most of the favoritism. And then Michael Thomas's price. I know he still hasn't had the game that I have hoped, but he's been consistent. I mean, 5 for 61, 7 for 55, 6 for 50. He just hasn't found the end zone. And facing Tampa Bay, I think with Jameis, who knows where those balls are going to go? He could very easily find the end zone this week.
I have a quick question for you guys. So on DraftKings, if you follow the roster construction that we were talking about, where you're going cheaper at quarterback, mid-range at running back, expensive at wide receiver, you kind of end up needing a 3K crapper in your flex. So who are some of the lower names that you guys are targeting for cash? And specifically, do you think two of the guys that I'm looking at are worthy? The first one is Calvin Austin, and the second one is Quentin Johnston.
So I did the Chargers camp reports for Football Guys this summer, and I'm nervous about Johnston right now just because it seems like they're hesitant to give him a full-time role coming out there, but it could be the type of thing. He's certainly the type of player that he just goes off for 2 touchdowns in one game and the seal is broken and he's going to be out there. But in the summer, through what we've seen early in the season, it seems like Joshua Palmer is definitely that second wide receiver, and Johnston's usage is a little bit more when he's on the field, they're going to get him the ball and give him opportunities. And the other one, God, I'm
Calvin
blanking
Austin.
on who you mentioned. Yeah, I like him a lot. I mean, you're on that Steelers and Texans game, and so he's certainly capable of hitting a big play. A name that I'm looking at down there is Josh Downs at 3,500. I think we had he had 12 targets last week with 9 catches. That might be a little bit more of a play if with Gardner Minshew at quarterback as opposed to Richardson at quarterback. But that was the name down there that I kind of stood out to me.
Don't play either of those guys in cash. You don't need to. I mean, you could fit Keenan Allen, Devontae Adams, Puka at 67, Adam Thielen, DeAndre Swift, Kyron Williams, and then Kenny Pickett, and it's a fine cash lineup. Like, you don't need to go down to the 3K. I think Tank Dell and Adam Thielen are in such better spots that you just don't need to go down that low.
I agree.
Okay.
We've got tight ends. Phil, you want to hit some tight ends?
Yeah, I'll keep with the Pittsburgh theme and say that Pat Fryermuth is underpriced. He got off to a slow start this year, but his route participation over the last 2 games is exactly where you want it to be. It's hovering around 80%. Got on the board with a touchdown and a couple of catches last week. And I mean, his price is just good. He's like 100 more than Juwan Johnson, who hasn't done anything this year, and Hayden Hurst, who's basically turned back into a zilch after a good week 1. Whereas Fryermuth, I think, especially, I'm not sure if Allen Robinson is playing this week, but if he's out and we know Deontay Johnson is out, the targets in that offense just become more consolidated, and it makes me like the cheap guys like Fryermuth and Calvin Austin that much more for Pittsburgh.
Devin, you going up or you going down at tight end?
I don't know. It depends on what you can. It depends on what you can afford. I think Fryermuth is fine. I think Jake Ferguson is decent at 3,500. We saw a little bit of a breakout last week, but the name that's popping to me, if you can afford it, and maybe you have to play both Thielen and Tank Dell, but Mark Andrews at 5,400. It's just a good price. I think that facing Cleveland has a really good defense, but I still don't believe in their linebackers to cover anybody, and they haven't faced really a tight end that's worth anything. So they faced Irv Smith, Pat Fryermuth, and Chig Okonkwo. None of those guys really scare you. Mark Andrews is a guy that could turn the slate on its head, and at 5,400, Fryermuth you might get 6 points, but you could get 10. But Andrews you could get 20. So if I'm gonna spend up, it'll be at Andrews, but otherwise probably Ferguson. I don't love this position, to be honest.
I know it's tough, and Ferguson does look to have that Dalton Schultz role. He's running at about 18% target share, which is what Schultz was last year. A name if you're digging bottom of the barrel, it depends if Logan Thomas is going to be out, but Cole Turner got 7 targets last week, and Washington will be playing from behind. We've seen Philadelphia abused by the tight end position. So I think that's 2,700 on DraftKings. That's scraping the bottom of the barrel, but that could be an option to hit into your lineups.
Okay.
All right. Before we move on to GPPs, make sure to head to footballguys.com/plans to become a Hall of Fame subscriber. Hall of Fame subscribers get access to all DFS content for less than $20 monthly or $95 annually. So that's where you're going to get most of our best DFS content. So if you're not a subscriber yet, make sure to jump on that plan. Let's jump into GPP plays. And Devin, where are you going at quarterback on GPP?
Yeah, disregard everything we said for cash for quarterbacks because you can throw it out the window. I think that the strategy that I'm looking at is spending up at quarterback, spending up at running back, and spending down at receiver. So I think this week I might spend up and go with Josh Allen. I think that he's going to be under rostered. But the other name that I'm looking at pretty hard this week is, believe it or not, it's Lamar Jackson. Nobody's going to be playing him at 7,700. I have him at currently 4% rostered, and he hasn't been necessarily good. Cleveland's defense has been really good, but you can get, if you can get Lamar Jackson sub 5%, he's had 100+ rushing yard games against Cleveland multiple times throughout his career. And Justin Fields, 1.5% rostered. 6,600. A lot of people are not going to want to pay that price. They're going to go to FanDuel and pay, that cheap price that we talked about. But it's a make or break game for Fields. And then the last guy, Joe Burrow. I think it's another bounce back spot for him. 6,500. I think, Jeff, you could throw for 300 yards against this Tennessee defense. They made Deshaun Watson look good. Outside of his throwing backwards motion, which it's funny because everyone who watched Red Zone's like, oh, Deshaun Watson's terrible. He actually played really well last week, but everyone only saw that play. So Tennessee's defense is just abysmal against the pass. So Joe Burrow, if he's healthy, you could easily stack Chase. You could stack Higgins. There's a lot of goodness there, and it might be a way to go.
Yeah, you definitely called me out. You caught me. I saw the Watson backwards, and you were right on me on Twitter. And you're exactly right. Watson.
He was 28 for 32 with 280 yards. It was the best he's played in Cleveland.
Yeah, that's important because they're going to need that. But I like those plays. I was going to ask you about the Baltimore side going against Cleveland because I think that narrative around that this week, everybody's going to be off that. Phil, do you have any other quarterbacks that you're targeting?
Yeah, I generally agree with the strategy of flipping the build and spending up. So I'm going to have tournament lineups with Allen, with Jalen Hurts, with Justin Herbert, definitely with Anthony Richardson, who I would love to get to in cash games. I don't think Justin Fields is a bad play. I would even consider him in cash if Richardson wasn't the same price, if I could get up there. Out of all of the high end quarterbacks, I think that it might be a good week to go after Tua. I think he's going to have the least ownership out of that group by a pretty wide margin because it's the perceived toughest matchup. But he's over 30 points in 2 out of his 3 games, and the Bills have a great defense, but they have played Zach Wilson, Jimmy Garoppolo, and Sam Howell thus far, so it's not like we could dismiss a shootout out of hand. And I think as Tua's ownership gets lower, and we've talked about the receivers that we like, Tyreek Hill isn't going to be as popular as he should be either, and you get to stack those two with a big ceiling in a week where nobody else is. I don't hate it.
Sam Howell's the last name I'll throw out there. 1% rostered. Philly's
Yeah.
pass defense was largely predicated on the pass rush last year, and it just doesn't exist this year. So Howell has shown upside. I mean, he threw for almost 300 yards earlier this season, and Philly's allowing 275 yards passing per game. It's not going to be pretty, but they allowed 316 and 3 to Mac Jones. And is Sam Howell really that much worse than Mac Jones? I don't really think so. Certainly there's a floor when you think about a 5th round quarterback that is pretty ugly, but if he can get 316 and 3 at that price, he's going to be a guy that you're going to want to target.
Yeah, I mean, you guys cleared out my sheet, so I don't really have any other names to throw in. We can
Well,
move
you
on to
go
running
first
backs.
for running backs. Give me a break from talking.
You go for running backs?
You go.
Yeah, so of course James Cook is a guy that I'm always going to be mentioning because playing that Miami matchup, we've seen him have the lion's share of opportunities out of that Buffalo backfield. He hasn't gotten the red zone work, and he probably won't get the red zone work. But I think I saw Jordan McNamara was on with the Football Guys show, mentioned that he's basically leading the league in terms of like most due for a touchdown in terms of touchdown regression. So that's one. I kind of enjoy the Alvin Kamara game back narrative, and I think that you look at that, yeah, you're not going to be able to run the ball on them, but using Jameis Winston, using Kamara in the short passing game are things that I kind of looked at. That's where I'm like kind of in that mid range. Maybe Miles Sanders as well. We see Miles Sanders leading he's going up against that Minnesota defense that has been very giving, and I think he's like 6 targets per game or something like that. He saw heavy involvement in the passing game. What do you guys got?
What are we doing with Josh Jacobs and Derrick Henry?
Derrick Henry, I'm out. I'm completely out on Derrick Henry. If he goes off and if somebody else, congratulations, I'm happy for him. Josh Jacobs, that's got to click. Like eventually, you would think. But I mean, Pittsburgh was not a great matchup for him last week, I don't think. But this, you would think this is it. I mean, going against the Chargers, when is it going to get better for him? And especially if Jimmy Garoppolo does play, or if he's out and you got Brian Hoyer, you're going to have to rely on Josh Jacobs a bit in that game.
Would it be Brian Hoyer?
It would be Brian Hoyer. From everything I've seen, it would be Brian Hoyer, not Aiden O'Connell. I think Aiden O'Connell would be the type of thing of Jimmy Garoppolo's out for the season. Let's give the kid a little bit of time to run with it. Whereas if it's going to be 1 week, let's give it to Hoyer.
And they're 1-2. Like they're still, if they were 0-3, they might look to O'Connell, but they're playing the 1-2 Chargers. Like this is still theoretically a big divisional game. So I don't think they're going to roll out O'Connell and just,
No.
The problem is, what if he's good, right? And then you have a controversy between him and Garoppolo, which they don't want to deal with. So, Christian McCaffrey, like the guy is putting up Justin Jefferson numbers, and because he's a running back, people don't want to play him. But 9,200, he scored a touchdown in every game this season. He's topped 100 yards in every game this season. So, 100 yards rushing in 2 of those 3 games. So, to me, he's separating himself, especially with like Nick Chubb being out, Austin Eckler being banged up. He's like the tier, maybe 2 tiers above every other running back that's out there. So, 9,200, I think he's going to be about 12 to 14% rostered as of Thursday night, and it's a really strong pivot off of Tyreek Hill and Justin Jefferson for me.
Yeah, the only game he didn't hit 100 was Thursday night, and they didn't need him to. I think he was at 60 at halftime, and he essentially took the second half off.
Yeah, but I'm talking 100 rushing plus passing, or rushing plus receiving. So he's topped that in all 3 games.
Yeah.
Yeah, and one thing I'll say about McCaffrey is that the worry that I had about him for cash games being that the 49ers might blow out the Cardinals, and then he would come off the field. In GPPs, that's where you want to kind of embrace that variance and say, all right, if they blow him out, it's going to be because Christian McCaffrey had 3 touchdowns and 150 total yards, which is very much possible. So I agree with that call. I agree with the James Cook call. I think he's even better in lineups that don't have Josh Allen or Diggs or Gabe Davis. What if this is his week with all these yards he's putting up to finally hit the end zone, and he's the one that kind of powers that Buffalo attack. And then Devin mentioned DeAndre Swift as a potential cash play, and I do think that he's priced well enough for cash. I couldn't get there because I guess the stats that I value most for cash game running backs weren't really there. It was still like a 50-50 split with Kenny Gainwell. He's probably not going to score short touchdowns until the league decides to outlaw the Jalen Hurts mosh pit, tush push, whatever you want to call it, play that they do on the 1 yard line. Eagles running backs still aren't catching passes, even though there was a narrative that said that's what they got Swift for. So for me, he's a little shaky for cash games, but because he looks so good, he jumps off the screen behind that offensive line. You totally can't rule out like another huge day on the ground with long touchdowns, and I think that plays better for GPPs.
Yeah, I mean, if he just stopped getting tackled at the 1 yard line, then he would get the touchdown, and Hurts wouldn't be stealing all of those. I think it's maybe like 3 or 4 times he's been tackled at the 1. You like any of the Miami running backs as and GPP plays, or are you still off them there?
They're just not coming up to the top of my list here, so I'm going to say no.
I don't mind Raheem Mostert. I mean, he had 121 yards and 2 touchdowns against the Patriots, which is a pretty good match, pretty good defense. Like Buffalo and the Patriots defenses, I would say, are similar in terms of like their rushing defense. I can't get on Devon Achane just because he's a backup running back. But Mostert, I think, he's been more than productive. He's been really good this year.
All right, let's hit some wide receivers for GBPs. Phil, what do you have for wide receivers?
So still Keenan Allen, even though he's going to be popular, I think he's too strong of a value to fade even at high ownership. Curious, Devin, do you know or do you remember where you had Michael Pittman for percent rostered?
Not right now. It's 9%.
9%. Okay. So if it's 9%, maybe not so much. I thought that he might go like sub 5% just because of where he's priced relative to a lot of other popular plays. So I'll be keeping an eye on the update for that one. But that guy I don't usually love him for tournaments because he's more of, racks up receptions, not so much yardage. But I do see a ceiling for him this week in that matchup against the Rams, and he's got 11, 12, and 11 targets in his 3 games this year. So if Pittman comes in under owned, I'm into him.
He's going to fall from 9. I just looked,
Okay.
and he's probably going to be in the 5 to 6 range.
Okay, so I do like him a lot at 5%. And then there's 2 other situations on my list that I'm watching. Number 1 is the 49ers wide receivers. So I think from the last thing that I read, the situation there is flipped where Ayuk is back at practice and Debo hasn't practiced yet this week. If that's the case, obviously you want Ayuk if Debo is out. It's kind of a no-brainer in all formats. And I guess the Michael Thomas drinking game is getting around too because I'm gonna mention him for GPPs. Thomas at 5,200 and Shaheed at 4,000 are both a lot more interesting to me with Jameis Winston at quarterback than they were with Derek Carr at quarterback. And I don't think anybody's really going to play them much outside of Winston stacks. So I might like them more as one-offs. I think one of those guys ends up having a really big game.
Yeah, I'll go pretty quick. I know we've been long, but Justin Jefferson, 9,600. To get Jefferson at sub 10% is the first time you'll be able to do that all year. A lot of people are going to be looking in this 8K range. They're going to be looking at Stephon Diggs. They're going to be looking at Jamar Chase. They're going to be looking at Devontae Adams. They're going to be looking at Keenan Allen. And trying to differentiate yourself and getting a guy like Justin Jefferson at facing a defense that just allowed 112 yards to DK Metcalf. They struggled against Chris Olave. So this is it's a matchup where it doesn't really matter, I guess. Justin Jefferson's matchup proof. Nico Collins, interesting. A lot of people are going to be looking at Tank Dell. So Tank Dell is going to be somewhere in the neighborhood of 15 to 20%. Nico Collins is going to be about 7%. So the price for Nico is still pretty good at 50. What is he? 52, 53, something like that. 51, even better. So Nico Collins is definitely a guy I'm looking at. And then I'll throw one more out there. Who do I want to go with on my list? He'll be popular, but Tutu Atwell at 5,500. He's a guy. It's a good price against that Colts secondary. Good stacking option too if you really wanted to go into Matthew Stafford. But that's all for now. I would fade George Pickens just because he's going to be stupidly popular, and he's not that good of a player.
Names
Like,
that I got.
He's not the guy. If I'm taking a guy at 20% at 5,400, and he's the only guy, I don't think he benefits all that much from being the only guy. Is what I'm trying to say.
I agree. Yeah, it's not been. I was hoping that he would take that job over and be that number one wide receiver, but he just hasn't kind of gotten there with that. Some other deep names that I'm targeting. Jacoby Myers is a pivot off of Devontae Adams. We've seen him have very heavy target share. They're really just targeting those two wide receivers. So if he gets the touchdown, he would be the play there. And then Elijah Moore is a player that's gotten a pretty heavy target share, and so I think that game's probably going to be a game people stay away from. Maybe he's due to get into the end zone a time or two. Our Cecil Lammy thinks that it's going to be the Marvin Mims week, and he's scraping the bottom of the barrel. We see that explosion there. I mean, he could pop off for 2 long touchdowns at 3,900 on DraftKings and really kind of pay for you there. But I do like some of the other call outs. Let's hit tight ends real quick on GPPs. Are you varying off cash game, or where you kind of go with those?
For me, the same thing that I said about Brandon Ayuk, I'll say about George Kittle. If Debo Samuel is out, 5,100 is a great price for Kittle. We saw last week when Ayuk was out, Kittle had 9 targets, went over 3x his current salary on DraftKings, and I don't think Arizona really has anybody that could stop him. And the other one, which again is more of a situation than a play, is the Chargers tight end. Gerald Everett hasn't practiced yet due to an illness. Sounds like, usually NFL players get over that by Sunday, but I guess it depends on what the illness is. If he plays, I think 3,600 is worth it to see if he picks up some of the targets Mike Williams is going to leave behind. And if he doesn't play, then touchdown Donald Parham is very interesting. I haven't even looked at his salary, but I'm sure it's low.
Yeah, the only name I'll throw out there is Dallas Goedert, 4,400, has 11 receptions over his last 2 games. So the Eagles started slow in their passing game, and he could still have a role here.
Yeah, my only other one I'm going to add the Buffalo tight ends, primarily Dawson Knox in this matchup, because I think Knox could get in the end zone a couple times and provide some value there. All right, now we got our stacks. Phil, who are your stacks for this week?
So my favorite stack is Pickett, Pickens, and Calvin Austin. So I'll kind of go against what Devin thought about Pickens. I just think that, again, without Deontay Johnson and if Allen Robinson rather scratches, um, I think that's where the ball's going. But you could also go Pickett, Austin Fryermuth, and then you have enough money for whoever you want. So that's my favorite stack. I also think that a Stafford double stack isn't the worst idea because we talked about liking Puka and we talked about liking Atwell. And shout out to John Lee, but he was always famous for saying that his wide receiver exposure dictated his quarterback exposure. And this would be one of those times to pay attention to that. If you're playing Rams wide receivers, you have to like Stafford by default.
Where you got, Devin?
CJ Stroud and Nico Collins. I think
like
it's 5,600 and 5,300. You can do a lot of things, and you get off the Tank Dell hype. So a lot of people, if are going Stroud, they're going to go Dell. They might even go both, but I'm going to fade Dell and just look at Nico Collins this week. And then long shot, I don't know if it's a long shot, but Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, T. Higgins. T. Higgins has been awful. Like objective, it's been bad. Just not catching passes. He's still getting targeted, so that's a good thing, but not catching those targets. I think Burrow comes out, puts 350 and 3 on the board, and could change the slate this week.
So I'm going to roll with the 4 p.m. Golden Corral special if Andy Dalton is starting and go with him and Adam Thielen. I like Brock Purdy.
I mean, come on. You can't say. Yes, that would have been mine too.
Hey, I mean, you didn't take it. I get to take it. Brock Purdy, we let off the show talking about Brock Purdy.
2013 Peyton Manning comes back out tomorrow. Then I want Peyton Manning and Eric Decker and R.I.P. Demaryius Thomas. But, like, that's not going to happen.
I don't know. I mean, we're recording on Thursday. You never know what's going to happen this weekend. We let off the show with Brock Purdy. So Brock Purdy and George Kittle. I like that stack if one of the wide receivers are out. And then on the high end, we saw Justin Herbert is smoking right now. And so if you can pair Justin Herbert and Keenan Allen at that price, and then maybe throw Josh Palmer in too at 4,000 and kind of really want to get in there with throwing two guys in there. So that would be one other one. Phil, what's your bargain play for this week?
It's got to be Kenny Pickett after all of the stumping for him that I've done this evening. And Calvin Austin is a close second.
What do you got, Devin?
Adam Thielen, especially if Bryce Young misses. No, best value play of the day, Devontae Adams, $8,000.
Mine is I do like that AJ Brown price 7,700 on FanDuel, and then throwing the dart at Marvin Mims on DraftKings at 3,900. So that's what we have for this week. Make sure to like and subscribe the videos, guys. Do you got any closing thoughts for this slate or anything else going on?
Yeah, I'm not getting a haircut until Cracking FanDuel loses, so it's 3-0 on the year. So if you're struggling in DFS cash games, I think it's like $20 for the month for. Like the prices that Joe is giving for DFS content compared to $500 for the season that other people are doing is insane. And I give out my cash lineup. It takes me about 15 hours of research to actually do it on Friday and Saturday mornings. So head over there, 3-0, 3-0, 3-0. We're going 18-0, and I'm gonna have hair down to here when this show ends. But my wife will be very upset. But I took $20 and I'm rolling it over every week. So if it goes 18-0, there's gonna be I'm gonna buy a new house probably.
Hey, I mean that's just compound interest. That's just simple math there.
It's just investing at that point.
It is. It really is. All right. Have a good night, everybody. Thank you for joining us.